This is a Fox News alert. President Trump heading to Florida this hour to spend the holiday break at his Mar-a-Lago estate after helping to deliver the gift of sweeping tax reform to America. Hello and welcome to Happening Now. I'm Rick Leventhal in for John Scott.
And hi to you, Rick, and to all of you, I'm Leah Gabriel. The president preparing to sign the largest tax overhaul in decades into law. He's also expected to sign a stopgap measure to fund the government until January 19th. Congress avoiding a shutdown, but setting up a showdown on hot-button issues like immigration, health care, and the budget, all once the holiday break is over. The president expressing optimism that Congress will come together and get things done.
Mr. Trump tweeting, quote, "At some point, and for the good of the country, I predict we will start working with the Democrats in a bipartisan fashion. Infrastructure would be a perfect place to start. After having foolishly spent $7 trillion in the Middle East, it is time to start rebuilding our country." Fox Business Network's Blake Berman is live from the White House with more. Blake, I understand the president is in the Oval Office right now signing the tax bill?
That's exactly right, Rick. And so if he hasn't signed it yet, he should be signing this tax bill within minutes here. Reporters and cameras are inside the Oval Office right now. So we are expecting to see those images and hear from the president within minutes here. Earlier today, the president took to Twitter to frame it this way. He wrote on Twitter, and I quote here, "Our big and very popular tax cut and reform bill has taken on an unexpected new source of love. That is big companies and corporations showering their workers with bonuses. This is a phenomenon that nobody even thought of, and now it is the rage." He ends by writing, "Merry Christmas." Now, the president there appears to be referring to the handful of major corporations that have already said that they will either be upping their charitable contributions or their investments, or in some cases, give out year-end bonuses to their workers. Speaking of year-end, the president, traditionally, in years past, normally gives a year-end news conference. You might be able to hear the helicopter circling above me right now. We are expecting, after the president signs this tax bill, to leave the White House and head down to Florida without doing some full-blown official news conference. That would allow the president to end the year on this tax reform high. To that end, he tweeted out just a little while ago, and I quote, "With all my administration has done on legislative approvals, broke Harry Truman's record, regulation cutting, judicial appointments, building military, VA, tax cuts and reform, record economy, stock market, and so much more, I am sure great credit will be given by mainstream news." A little bit of tongue-in-cheek there from the president. So the reporters, the cameras inside the Oval Office right now, and within minutes here, we expect to see the president officially signing this tax bill into law, Rick and Leah.
And as soon as that tape is brought back out of the White House, we can play it back and watch it for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Blake.
You got it.
It's been an amazing experience, I have to tell you. Hasn't been done in 34 years, but actually really hasn't been done because we broke every record. It's the largest, I always say the most massive, but it's the largest tax cut in the history of our country, and reform, but tax cut. Really something special.
President Trump praising the tax reform bill passing Congress this week, with his party looking to build on that progress now. The tax bill remains highly unpopular, though, but Republican lawmakers are hoping that that will change once people start to see more money in their paychecks. And even then, the GOP could still face a tough road ahead going into the next year's midterm elections, with Democrats riding high on a wave of recent wins and plummeting approval ratings for the president. Well, joining me now is Bill McGurn, Main Street columnist for the Wall Street Journal and former chief speechwriter for President George W. Bush. Nice to see you.
Good to see you, Leah.
All right, so let's talk about going into the midterms.
Right.
What's the strategy now for Republicans?
Well, the strategy now is to try to improve on what they've done to get the economy growing. It's incredible to me that the Democrats are relying solely on polls now showing that they have a generic advantage and an enthusiasm advantage, that they've boxed themselves out of any growth. Put it this way, President Trump was elected largely by people who were struggling and thought that he would deliver a growing, robust economy for them. If they feel improvement in their lives, that's a big achievement for them, real improvement. And for Democrats to mock bonuses from companies and stuff to their employees. I know a lot of people with children who would love to have a $1,000 bonus. You know, it covers a lot of Christmas presents or music lessons. It's not anything to sneer at.
Well, and that's why Republicans wanted to get this tax reform bill passed this year so that going into next year, starting in February, they say that people will see more money, less money taken out of their paychecks and more money that they take home. So how much of an impact will that have going to the midterms?
I think it'll have a huge impact, and I think it points to what you said. Yes, most people will get a tax cut and save a few $100s, maybe a couple of $1,000s from the what they were paying before. But the biggest benefit to middle class and working class people is the growth that comes. It gives them opportunities for other jobs. It gives their children. I have a child going to be entering the job market. I would like a growing economy. Remember, under the Obama years, we were told that 2% growth, which is very anemic, is the new normal. Now it's around 3%. If President Trump can continue that, people are going to feel a dramatic improvement in their lives, and that there are opportunities before them, and that's the way you fatten paychecks.
And the economy is always one of the top issues in any election cycle, but historically tax bills, large-scale tax bills like Reagan's, haven't really had that much of a boost for the incumbent party. Looking back at 1982, Republicans suffered losses even after Reagan passed that first tax reform.
Well, midterms generally go against the president, right? I mean, that's historic. But if you look at Reagan, what he did with those tax cuts, if you look at the growth rates of those years, they're astronomical by today's standards. And if you look by the time of the '84 re-election, I mean, Reagan was coasting, Morning in America, that everything, was so much better. If you remember how negative it was when he came in, the misery index, Jimmy Carter and so forth.
Well, President Trump this is a huge legislative accomplishment for his administration. But Karl Rove wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week, and I want to just put up a little bit of that on the screen for our viewers. He said, if Republicans are to have any hope of holding Congress after the midterms, Mr. Trump must allow the political spotlight to shine on individual GOP candidates. Stepping back from the spotlight will be harder for Mr. Trump than any previous president. He goes on to say that basically that's the only path that approximates a victory for Republicans in 2018. Do you think Karl Rove has a point that President Trump needs to step back? Because right now he's unpopular.
Yeah, look, there's different ways of doing it. Karl and I, both served in the White House at the same time, and our friend Ed Gillespie is a great guy, just lost his race for the governor, partly because of a Trump factor, his unpopularity. And I think he needs to give these candidates a chance to go out there by themselves, and stand or fall. A Republican candidate doesn't need to be fighting the Democrat and fighting the president, or fighting wings of his party divided by the president. It's not a good thing. But we hope that in the future, they'll concentrate like what they did on the tax cuts and come together and show they can work together. That's another extraordinary thing about this bill. Tax reform is not easy. I mean, there's a reason it hasn't been done in 30 years.
Yeah, it isn't easy, but we do know that President Trump does like being out on the campaign trail. He does enjoy those rallies. So we'll see what he ends up deciding to do. Bill McGurn, thank you.
Thanks, Liam. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you. Rick?
Again, the president signing a historic tax bill. We will bring you that video as soon as we get it. In the meantime, police trying to catch an armed and dangerous man before the worst can happen. The hunt for this suspect who's been shooting at drivers on busy California highways. And President Trump says he will not fire special counsel Robert Mueller. So why are so many in the media still questioning whether or not he will? Our panel weighs in on that next.
No, I'm not. No.
We're going to go back to the White House shortly for a playback of tape from the Oval Office where the president apparently, we believe, has just signed the tax bill before he heads off to Mar-a-Lago for a beautiful holiday weekend to celebrate Christmas.
Yeah, and we understand that he did take some questions, so we will be getting to hear a little bit from President Trump. Probably a lot of excitement from him as this major legislative accomplishment has been achieved prior to the holidays and prior to being able to go and enjoy the holidays at Mar-a-Lago.
The Republicans certainly celebrating this as a victory. Democrats not so much.
Right, and one of the things we've been talking about is how much is this going to play? Because as soon as legislators leave for home, they're going to be thinking about the midterm elections.
Sure.
It's in a blink of the eye. It's going to be January, and everyone's going to be talking about that. So, of course, Republicans, President Trump.
And here he is.
Right here. Let's take a listen to what he has to say.
You're all right.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here, and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, have great holidays. We are going to sign some very important things today. One is a continuing resolution that very importantly gives us the right, and we are ordering $4 billion worth of missile defense equipment and missiles themselves. Very important, top of the line, best in the world. We make the best military product in the world. Nobody is even close. So we're ordering $4 billion worth of missile defense, and that will be done by signing right here and also by notifying the Speaker of the House and President of the Senate, designating the missile defense as an emergency defense fund. So it's $4 billion for that and $700 million for various other military forms of equipment. And I'm very honored to be doing that. Our military has been doing a fantastic job in so many ways with ISIS, and everything they're touching lately has been working out. So we're signing that. This is the letter to Mitch McConnell and separately to Paul Ryan, authorizing that having to do with missile defense. Okay. Very important. So that's being done today, and that's going to be sent out. And then when I watched the news, as you know, we had the largest tax cuts in our history just approved. And I was going to wait for a formal signing sometime in early January, but then I watched the news this morning, and they were all saying, will he keep his promise? Will he sign it by Christmas? You were one. But will he sign it by Christmas? And I called downstairs. I said, get it ready. We have to sign it now. We were going to wait till January 7th or 8th and do a big formal ceremony. But every one of the networks was saying, will he keep his promise? Will he sign it for Christmas, before Christmas? And so I immediately called. I said, let's get it ready. As you know, $3.2 trillion in tax cuts for American families, including the doubling of the standard deduction and the doubling of the child tax credit. The typical family of four earning $75,000, we see an income tax cut of more than $2,000. Many much higher than that, slashing their tax bill in half. And they're going to start to see that because we're signing today. They're going to start to see that in February. The numbers will speak. One of the big things that happened, you have some great companies. I want to thank AT&T, who actually was the first out of the box, and Boeing and Sinclair and Wells Fargo and Comcast, even though they own NBC, which is not so nice to the presidency or the president. But Comcast also, they all have made tremendous contributions to their employees and tremendous contributions to spending money in this country because of the tax bill. And they all said that it's because of the tax bill. So they're making tremendous investments. That means jobs. It means a lot of things. And we're very happy. So that's AT&T, Boeing, Sinclair, Wells Fargo, Comcast, and now many other companies, as you see. In fact, just this morning, I see 3 more companies came on. A friend of mine, Bob Kraft, called me last night. He said this tax bill is incredible. He owns the New England Patriots, but he's in the paper business, too. And he said, based on this tax bill, he just wanted to let me know that he's going to buy a big plant in the great state of North Carolina, and he's going to build a tremendous paper mill there, or paper products plant. And I've had many calls such as that, where people that are entrepreneurs, people in business, they're going out and they're going to buy, frankly, factories that are closed, abandoned, and now they're not going to be abandoned any longer. This is having an even bigger impact faster than I thought. The corporate tax rate, as you know, will be lowered from 35 to 21%. That means that more products will be made in the USA. A lot of things are going to be happening in the USA. We're going to bring back our companies that they've already started coming back. I think they had certain confidence in me. They figured we were going to get this done, but they have already started. Something very important to me, the family farmers and small business owners who lost their business because of the estate tax, most of them won't have any estate tax to pay. It will be a great thing for their families. You can leave your farm to your family. You can leave your business, your small business, to your family, not even so small, because the numbers are pretty big here. So they'll be exempt from having to pay estate tax, which will be tremendous. They'll keep their farms and their businesses in the family. Businesses will be able to deduct 100% of the cost of their capital investments in the year the investment is made. That's called expensing. And to do one-year expensing, I think, is going to be one of the biggest things in the bill, frankly. I think people are going to go out and absolutely go wild over expensing. Bob Kraft mentioned that last night in his telephone call. The fact that they can do one-year expensing is a fantastic asset. Historic small business tax cuts and pass-throughs now are made really, really good for the business owner. They're hiring people. I see it on television. I'm reading about it all over, where people are hiring a lot of people right now to go to work. The small business tax cut and the pass-throughs are now really incentivizing people. We're going to bring back probably $4 trillion from overseas. Nobody knows the exact number, but it's massive. It'll be over $3 trillion. It could be $5 trillion, but it's a tremendous amount of money that was caught overseas that the bureaucracy plus the tax laws didn't allow it to reasonably be brought back into our country. So we think at least $4 trillion is going to be brought back. And if you look at that, it's going to be brought back right under the code. This is something that Republicans wanted for years and Democrats wanted for years, and yet it never got done. Who would object to trillions of dollars being brought back into our country? Nobody. But it never got done. Now it's being done. And the bottom line is, this is the biggest tax cuts and reform in the history of our country. This is bigger than actually President Reagan's many years ago. I'm very honored by it. In addition, we have ANWR. We're opening up ANWR for drilling. They've tried to get that for 40 years. They've tried to get that even during the Reagan administration. They could never get it. That alone would be a big bill if that ever happened, but that's even part of this. And we have, of course, the individual mandate, which is a very unfair and very unpopular provision, as you know, in Obamacare. Essentially, I think it ultimately leads to the end of Obamacare. It's essentially, I think Obamacare is over because of that, and we're going to come up with something that's really going to be very good. But the individual mandate was very unfair because you're basically saying pay for something in order not to have to get health care. So you're paying not to have health care. It was very unfair. Many people thought it should have been overturned in the Supreme Court. Didn't quite make it, almost, but didn't quite make it. But now we're overturning the individual mandate, most unpopular thing in Obamacare. Very, very unfair. So this is the bill right here, and we're very proud of it. It's going to be a tremendous thing for the American people. It's going to be fantastic for the economy. It's going to keep companies from leaving our shores and opening up in other countries. They are very disincentivized to do that. There's not a lot of sense to do that. You do that, and I don't think you're going to be running your company very well. So what's happening is we're going to sign this. This is a little picture of it. It fits nicely in the box. I said take it out of the box because people have to see. And all of this, everything in here, is really tremendous things for businesses, for people, for the middle class, for workers. And I consider this very much a bill for the middle class and a bill for jobs. And jobs are produced through companies and corporations, and you see that happening. Corporations are literally going wild over this, I think even beyond my expectations, so far beyond my expectations. So I'll sign this today rather than having a very big formal ceremony in 2 weeks when we were going to do it, because I didn't want you folks to say that I wasn't keeping my promise. I am keeping my promise. I'm signing it before Christmas. I said that the bill would be on my desk before Christmas, and you are holding me literally to that. So we did a rush job today. It's not fancy, but it's the Oval Office. It's the great Oval Office. And just to conclude, our country is doing very well. We've tremendously cut regulations, legislative approvals, for which I'm given no credit in the mainstream media. We have, I believe it's 88, which is #1 in the history of our country. Second now is Harry Truman. Harry Truman had more legislative approvals than any other president, and a record long held. And we beat him on legislative approvals, for which I get no credit. A lot of people say he needed this because he has had no legislative approvals. Well, if you look at VA Accountability Act and so many other bills having to do with the VA, having to do with the military, having to do with many things, we have more legislative victories than any other president, not including this, but this is the capper because this is, again, the biggest tax cut, biggest reform of all time. So it's an honor to have you with us, and we will sign this right now. This is something I'm very proud of, great for our country, great for the American people. Thank you all. So we won't do the whole thing, but this is basically what it is. That's your bill. And I want to thank some people in particular that aren't here because, again, we expected a formal ceremony in 2 weeks. But Mitch McConnell has been fantastic, worked so hard. We would speak at 3 in the morning and 2 in the morning, and we would speak whenever we had to speak. But he worked so hard, and the exact same thing can be said for Paul Ryan. They are very proud of this, and we're already seeing the results. And as I said, long ahead of schedule. Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, thank you very much. Orrin Hatch, the chairman, made a beautiful speech the other day in front of the White House. Absolutely brilliant, beautiful speech, and we appreciated it, and I appreciated it. Hardworking. Kevin Brady, I don't think he slept for months. It's almost like that's all he did was this. Mike Enzi, Senator Enzi. Diane Black. Rob Portman, the group of Rob Portman. Rob worked so hard, so knowledgeable on the subject. Pat Toomey, likewise. Tim Scott, likewise. John Thune, likewise. These people work so hard, and I don't know if they're given the proper credit. And the whole Senate, when I say the Senate, unfortunately, the Republicans in the Senate. Democrats don't like tax cuts. They want to raise your taxes. They don't want to lower your taxes. They want to raise your taxes, and they want to spend money foolishly on things that we don't need in many cases. So we're cutting taxes, we're taking care of our military, and we're taking care of people. And we're really doing a job on jobs. So these folks have been so fantastic that I had to call them in. And plenty of others, believe me, Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate have been incredible. So this is what we got. We had it. It was all set to go. As soon as I got back from Christmas, where we'll be working in Florida, I'll be working very hard during that Christmas because we have many things we're talking about, including North Korea, including a lot of things happening in the Middle East, as you know. We've made tremendous strides, obviously, in Syria with ISIS. We've taken back virtually all of the caliphate, all of the land. Same thing in Iraq, and we're making tremendous strides. It's sort of the unwritten story right now. But since my speech on Afghanistan, we're making tremendous progress, tremendous strides. We've opened it up, and it's a whole different world in Afghanistan, I can tell you that. So I'll be working very hard over the holidays. Again, I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas. I have some beautiful pens over here, and because all of these folks are either continuing to work down the road or getting ready to leave, and I'm sure they'll be working very hard also. I think I'm probably going to hand some of them to the press. Does the media, would any of the media like any of, oh, look at these camera guys. But I think we'll do that. So we have them. Many of you have worked very hard. Many of you have worked very, very fairly, and we really appreciate that. So here you go, folks. You want the box with it or not, huh?
Mr. President, can you talk a little bit about how much you'll travel to sell this tax?
I don't think I'm going to have to travel too much to sell it. I think it's selling itself. It's becoming very popular. But I think you'll see something on February 1st when they open up the paycheck. That's when you're going to start to see it, because by signing it now, it kicks in for this year. Remember, if we didn't make a certain date, it wouldn't kick in until next year, meaning the following year, 19, and I wasn't happy with that. So we worked very, very hard to make sure it was this year. Even language originally said the corporate would kick in 19, but we didn't do that. We have it kick in now, but we had to sign. So I don't think we're going to have to do much selling. I think the corporations that are giving billions and billions of dollars away to their workers, and many more are coming, I think that's really what's selling this, maybe better than anybody could, including myself. But I think come February, when they open their checks and they see, wow, what happened? I have a lot more money in here. I think that's really going to be something very special. So have a great holiday, folks. Some of you folks take, I in particular like the boom holders. They were so nice to me the other day, right? And the cameramen.
Mr. President,
and the cameramen.
Mr. President, as you mentioned, no Democrats have supported this tax cut legislation.
Thanks, everyone.
Will they regret it?
I think the Democrats will really regret. The Democrats already regret it. You know, they have their typical thing, it's for the rich. They know that's not true. And they've been called out on it by the media, actually. But the Democrats very much regret it. They wanted to be a part of it, just doesn't work out. But I really do believe, and I said on social media today, I really do believe we're going to have a lot of bipartisan work done. And maybe we start with infrastructure, because I really believe infrastructure can be bipartisan. We've spent $7 trillion in the Middle East, not to mention all of the lives and all of the heartache, and it's so sad. $7 trillion. It's time for us to rebuild our country. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Everyone is time to go. It is time to go, Jeff. It is time to go.
You would have started with infrastructure at the beginning of this year. Would that have sort of
Well, we're going to get infrastructure. Infrastructure is the easiest of all. We're very well on our way. We've essentially repealed Obamacare. You know, the individual mandate is a very big factor in this bill, frankly. A lot of people don't talk about it because the tax cut is so important. But infrastructure is by far the easiest. People want it, Republicans and Democrats. We're going to have tremendous Democrat support on infrastructure, as you know. I could have started with infrastructure. I actually wanted to save the easy one for the one down the road. So we'll be having that done pretty quickly. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
President Trump in the Oval Office just moments ago, just a little while ago, signing tax reform into law. He called it the biggest tax cut in history. He said it's larger than even the Reagan tax cuts. You know, he talked about the impact to businesses and the impact to middle-class Americans and how they'll see the difference in their paychecks starting in February. He also talked about the individual mandate and getting rid of the individual mandate in this legislation. And I also want to mention that, Rick, that he talked about the continuing resolution. He did sign that as well to keep the government running. He mentioned missile defense, and I think he probably did that, Rick, because the military has been suffering because of having to use continuing resolutions and being funded this way over and over and over again. So he mentioned $4 billion in missile defense, as well as $700 million for other military equipment. And as far as what's next, he said infrastructure, most likely, that he thinks that can be done in a bipartisan way.
But celebrating today the signing of this tax bill, which he said will be fantastic for the economy. He said we're already feeling the effects, that it's going to keep jobs in America and bring trillions of dollars in manufacturing and jobs back to America that we have lost overseas. So he's clearly very excited about the potential of this tax bill, which he says is really for the middle class, that it's going to save an average family of four $2,000 in its first year, and that could be a lot of money for a lot of families across America. So he seems pretty excited about that as he heads to Joint Base Andrews and prepares to board a plane to
to head to
down to
Mar-a-Lago,
Mar-a-Lago.
as you said, to go and celebrate and enjoy some time for the holidays.
Of course, Democrats are blasting this new tax law as destructive for the middle class, with some even calling it the single worst piece of legislation ever.
We'll be right
Stay
back.
tuned.
Welcome back. President Trump at Joint Base Andrews. He is getting ready to depart for Mar-a-Lago, the Winter White House, after just signing tax reform into law, signing the continuing resolution to keep the government funded until mid-January.
You're looking at Marine One, which the president flew on from the South Lawn of the White House to Joint Base Andrews. He will depart Marine One and board Air Force One for that trip down to West Palm Beach and Mar-a-Lago, where he will spend the weekend with his family celebrating Christmas.
He will indeed. And, you know, one of the things that he was just talking about when he was in the Oval Office signing tax reform into laws, he was talking about not just the impact for families of tax reform, but also the impact for businesses, how the corporate tax rate is now decreased from 35% down to 21%. And what he's talking about is how, and there's the president right now as we're speaking, we can see him waving at people. It doesn't look like he's going to stop and take any more questions after he spoke in the Oval Office. But back to what he said in the Oval Office, he was talking about how he believes we're going to see more things, more products made in the United States as a result of tax reform. And, you know, Rick, we were talking about how the what's next. What's next is going into the midterms for Republicans when everyone returns in January. And then the president says the next legislative piece will be infrastructure, and he thinks that that can be done in a bipartisan way.
He's walking towards the camera position. Not clear if he's going to answer questions as he walks by the media on his way to Air Force One. The president said he spoke with Bob Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, who's also in the paper business, and that Bob Kraft is already planning to open a plant down in North Carolina to manufacture paper products. And he said that's because of this historic tax bill that he just signed, that it encourages manufacturing in part because it drops the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 21%, and he believes that will bring jobs back to the U.S. He also called out several companies for giving money back to employees, including AT&T, Boeing, Sinclair, Wells Fargo, and even Comcast, which he pointed out owns NBC. He says he's not a fan of that network, but he credits them with giving money back or planning to give money back to their employees, thanks in part to this historic tax bill, which he just signed. And you see him there taking some photos with some of the members of the military there at Joint Base Andrews.
Yeah, we know he was just visiting members of the military yesterday as well at Walter Reed. That's something that the president typically does this time of year. The president definitely likes to take his time and say hello to people, including members of the military. Back to what he was talking about earlier when he was in the Oval Office, you know, one of the things that he said is that he talked about the individual mandate. And I think that that's going to be so interesting, Rick, to see what happens as we move in and move forward into the new year, removing the individual mandate. He said that ultimately that could lead to the end of Obamacare, and we know that that's been the intent all along. Republicans tried so hard to make that happen this year, weren't able to get it done. It'll be interesting to see what happens with insurance companies and what happens with premiums, because one of the concerns in getting rid of the individual mandate is it's sort of the block that pulls everything from Obamacare, can sort of pull things from underneath and cause it to collapse. And that could start with seeing an increase in premiums. So
I was just thinking about how cool that is for all these folks that are standing on the other side of that fence, the little kids and the people with their phones getting pictures with the president, shaking the president's hand. It's an early Christmas gift for fans of President Trump who gathered there to watch him leave. And then he walks over and he just says hi to him, and he starts posing for pictures and shaking hands. That's pretty cool that the president's doing that right now before he leaves Joint Base Andrews and climbs on their Air Force
You make such a
One
good point, Rick, because, you know, the president's popularity has not been high. And it's moments like these where the president is seen talking to people, greeting people, being out there with people who are his fans that are so important. And I think it probably feels pretty good to him also to see those people right after he signed such a major piece of legislation.
Yeah, I think his base is pretty solid at this point in terms of what he's accomplished, especially the tax bill that he signed today, which, again, he believes will boost the economy, will help the middle class, and will also encourage businesses to keep manufacturing in the U.S., to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., and keep this economy moving forward as it has been since he took office in January of this year.
Yeah, and the economy really has been doing so well. We just got that 3.2% growth. That's really strong. We've seen jobless numbers go down. There's the president just getting on board Air Force One, waving, saying goodbye to everyone as he heads to Mar-a-Lago. He did say that he's going to be working very hard over the holidays, so I'm sure he'll be planning and thinking about the next moves for the new year and how to support Republicans going into 2018 and going into the fights that they will have to stay in office, to maintain the positions in the Senate and Congress moving into next year's elections.
One thing we learned today, Leah, is that the Oval Office apparently is not fancy. I always thought it was fancy. He said it's not fancy, but it's the Oval Office, and that's where he signed the bill. Instead of having a big ceremony in January, he said he wanted to keep a promise, and I guess it's an early Christmas present, too, for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I think it is, and I love that you just mentioned that he said it wasn't fancy, because I think that really depends on where you come from.
Yeah.
But when you come from Trump Tower to the White House, I guess maybe it doesn't seem like it's that fancy, but certainly a big accomplishment for the president and for Republicans today.
As we look at Air Force One at Joint Base Andrews, majestic jet. They're pulling away the steps now, and I assume they'll be taxiing shortly to take off. We want to dive a little deeper into this tax bill that he just signed. I don't know if you've been paying attention to mainstream media coverage of tax reform, but there was a new article in the Wall Street Journal that says that the press corps is blinded by its own biases, and we want to read you a highlight from that article. To read all this coverage, it says, you'd be justified in believing that the entire Republican Party had been hit with a stupid stick. Its members united to jack up the taxes of millions of middle-income voters, throw the country into recession, and saddle today's toddlers with a future debt crisis, all to enable the transfer of tax plunder to fat cat donors. This is the Democratic line, and the media is embracing it. Are they? Joining us, Kelly Jane Torrance, Deputy Managing Editor for the Weekly Standard, and Aaron Delmore, Senior Political Correspondent for Bustle.com. Thanks to both of you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So the Wall Street Journal points out that 80% of Americans will pay less in taxes, including 90% of the middle class, by an average of $1,600. What about that?
Yeah, it's fascinating that the fact that 50% of Americans are actually against this tax plan. Now, who would be against having money in their pocket? But if you look at polling, 50% of Americans think their taxes are going to be going up next year because of this tax plan. Now, only 5% of Americans are going to be seeing a tax rise. And, you know, researchers debate how much effect the media has on people's thinking. And this seems to me a textbook example making the case that the media does have an effect, because there's really hard to find another explanation for that.
Yeah, Aaron, the media being described as anti-Trump, anti-Republican, so anti-tax bill.
Well, that editorial that you read from the Wall Street Journal has a partisan point of view. And there's been a lot of coverage out there that says that this is a huge achievement for President Trump, that there will be middle-class tax cuts, and that there are benefits to lowering the corporate tax rate. But there's a real question here over the underlying principle for tax reform. It's the question of how much revenue this will bring in, how much growth this will actually bring into the country. And that's a question that deserves to be asked.
Well, the president says it's going to be trillions of dollars, and that a lot of that is because of these corporate tax breaks that many corporations we're hearing are now going to be passing on to workers, including AT&T and Comcast, who are said to be handing out $1,000 bonuses to hundreds of thousands of workers, and then presumably those workers take that $1,000 and spend it.
And that's the underlying principle. And if that comes to pass, that'll make Republicans very, very happy. You have Gary Cohn, who says that he's expecting a 4% growth in GDP over the next 2 years. And you have Steve Mnuchin, who says that these tax cuts will pay for themselves, that they'll generate enough revenue to offset that $1.5 trillion cost. But Goldman Sachs says that they're only expecting 2.5% growth next year and 1.8% growth the year after that. They say 0.3% will be added on from this tax plan, but that falls short of estimations from the administration.
And we are watching Air Force One taxi now. Kelly Jane, this is a clear win for Republicans, even though it keeps getting painted as a loss. And I'm wondering if you think that Democrats will regret not signing on or helping to craft this bill.
It depends, as Aaron pointed out, what happens with the numbers. But I have to say the Democrats, so far, it looks like a win for them in that the media is painting it just how the Democrats want it. And I think this is, again, a perfect example of why the media shouldn't and can't claim ever to be objective, right? This is a huge bill, lots of provisions, some of it kind of complicated. There's no way that any media outlet can explain everything about the bill in a short segment or story. So, of course, they have to pick and choose. And as soon as somebody does that, you're choosing a spin. And that's what we saw with a lot of the headlines that focused on the corporate tax cuts and didn't mention or downplayed the personal ones. And I think that that's a perfect example of why the media can't claim to be objective, because they can't tell you everything at once. And they, of course, decide what they think is important. I do think a lot of media outlets did focus on the things that they thought Americans wouldn't like about the tax bill.
Well, I want to point out the Wall Street Journal article used one example, and that was USA Today, which it said was so desperate to depict the bill as a tax hike that its analysis of 5 household situations included a childless single renter earning $1 million a year, paying $50,000 in state and local taxes, and claiming $40,000 in charitable deductions. That was one of the examples that USA Today used to point out that this individual would pay close to $2,000 more in taxes. It doesn't seem like a realistic example.
I don't think anyone in America feels sorry for that person, someone who's making $1 million a year and paying, under $2,000 more every year. But that's you make a great point. That's exactly, the media can decide what they're going to show you. And by using that sort of example, they found someone who's going to see their taxes go up. Now, most people are not. And so, again, this shows that any story can be spun just about anyway, and they're not lying when they're using that example, but they're not being very helpful.
Example that was used, not with the math behind that example. No one's saying that that's not a factual, accurate representation of how that person's taxes will be changed. They're saying that it wasn't the best example. You can find hundreds of other examples on how this will impact middle-class voters and high-income voters and people who own or have shares in corporations. The reason why the focus is on the corporate tax rate is because it is deeper and those cuts are longer lasting.
As we watch Air Force One now prepare to take off from Joint Base Andrews and head down to Florida for the President's weekend at Mar-a-Lago, Aaron, do you think that he has a right to celebrate on this flight because of the signing of this bill?
It's a huge achievement for President Trump and for Republicans in Congress. This is what they wanted to get done. It hasn't been done in 30 years. So yes, this is a big achievement for him. And if he can get people to see a big difference in their own paychecks, if they feel more economically secure, if they begin spending more money, all of that will help Republicans through the 2018 midterms. But if that's not the intended effect, then that's going to come to bear as well.
Well, and that brings me to my last question for Kelly Jane. How does the president build on this? Can he build on this, considering that no Democrats took part in this particular piece of legislation?
That's a great question, Rick, and that's why I was a little surprised to see the president tweeting today saying that he thought that there was going to be work coming with Democrats, bipartisan work on infrastructure. And I wonder if he's being a little too optimistic. I think the Democrats see Trump as toxic, and they don't want to be seen as working with him at all. And if you look at the last few special elections, there was a very big anti-Trump vote out there. And I think the Democrats have made their political calculations that it's better not to work with Trump, even though they might actually get a few policy wins there, because they're considering the political ramifications more than the policy ramifications of what's going on in Congress right now.
Kelly Jane and Aaron, we want to thank you very much for being with us as we watch Air Force One climb into the skies. And Leah, I know that you are a jet fighter pilot, and I wonder, could you sit down at the controls of Air Force One and just figure it out? Could you fly that bird right there?
Absolutely.
Yes, really?
I'm totally joking.
No.
100% no, I could not. Not right now. I mean, I could be trained to fly that.
What if you had like a 5 minutes? You got to fly this thing.
Let's just say that if I had to land it, I would get a lot of information. I'd get people on the radio with me and get some help and try to put it down. But no, it would take a little more than 5 minutes to learn how to fly Air Force One.
Yeah.
The pilots who fly it, very, very qualified, as you can imagine. But I do think about, flying and some of the times when it felt really amazing. And this just must be a really wonderful feeling for the president as he's departing Washington and has this legislative accomplishment under his belt.
Absolutely.
And speaking of airplanes, an end to airstrikes, and that's at least for Australia. So why the country is ending airstrike operations in Iraq and Syria? That's next.
The Australian government has determined that we will bring home our 6 Super Hornet strike aircraft from the Middle East, marking the end of Australia's airstrike operations in Iraq and Syria.